Hello everybody, my name is Jacob and today I'm going to be talking to you about reforestation. Before we get into reforestation, we kind of have to talk about where that all arose from, and that is its opposite, deforestation. And what this is the removal of trees from an area. These areas are typically where trees should be. And these areas are being cleared out for things such as land, either for new factories to be built or tourism. These areas are also being cleared out for agricultural reasons or grazing for animals and such. There's also the use of timber for fuel, and then we also have the use of timber for construction and manufacturing and producing goods across the globe. Forests are pretty crucial to the well-being of pretty much everyone everywhere. Forests take up about 30% of the Earth's land surface, which is a pretty good chunk. What the forest does for people specifically is it provides food for people, it provides medicine and fuel for them, whether that's coal burning and whatnot. Additionally, we can see that worldwide forests provide 13.4 million people with jobs in just the forest sector, and then an additional 41 million people have jobs related to the forest. So you can see that there are a lot of people affected by the forest, and with the issue of deforestation there comes a lot of issues with that. Getting into the effects of deforestation, we can start off with soil erosion destruction. So typically, when those trees are there, they are providing shade to the soil underneath them. But because those trees are now gone, soils are then exposed to the sun's heat. In turn, the soil there is dried up, and the nutrients in the soil evaporate, and the bacteria that would typically help break down organic matter is affected. Eventually, rain washes through these areas, and with that, the soil and its surfaces become eroded. It's kind of taking a look at the picture that you can see on the slide. The ground becomes rough, and just plant life never gets to really take its full potential in returning to the area. Moving on to the water cycle, we can see that when forests are destroyed, both the atmosphere and water bodies in the areas of deforestation are affected. Trees typically absorb and retain water in their roots, and that in turn plays a large part of keeping water in the ecosystem of rainforests. Additionally, some of that moisture that's being held in those roots of the tree is let out into the atmosphere through moisture, and then that is actually going through the process of the water cycle. And when deforestation occurs, that process is being halted, and the full potential of the water cycle is being compromised, meaning there is less water being put into the atmosphere, less water is being brought down from the atmosphere through precipitation, and both riverbeds or small lakes are then beginning to dry out. Taking a look at some more of the effects of deforestation, we can see that there is a loss of biodiversity. That's kind of what's going on in the picture to the right. There's just these areas where animal life would typically be present, and it's kind of just being taken away from them. Species, both plants, are being lost, and many are going endangered. In fact, more than 80% of the world's species remain in tropical rainforests, and it is estimated that about 50 to 100 species of the animals are being lost each day as a result of the destruction of their habitat. To cap it all off, we obviously have the issue of climate change. Trees typically take the CO2 that is in the atmosphere and put that through the cycle of photosynthesis, but because these trees are being taken away, the CO2 that is in the atmosphere isn't being put anywhere, and it's being left in our atmosphere to give us trouble. In addition, as these trees are being destroyed, the CO2 that is being kept in those trees are now being released back into the atmosphere, just kind of accumulating all that CO2. And as deforestation continues, those numbers are going to continue to rise, and the issues that come along with climate change, such as rising ocean levels, that's just going to continue to get worse and worse. The problem with deforestation is the rate at which it's being done is actually too high than what our planet can take. Since humans started cutting down trees, a total of 46% of trees have been cut. And really, what we can take away from this is that we are just taking trees from our planet and we're not really giving anything back to combat that issue. Now we can finally get into reforestation and what that actually is. It's kind of self-explanatory, but it's just the process of getting trees back to these areas where it was once destroyed. This can be done through mass planting, which is pretty self-explanatory, just the mass accumulation of trees being planted in areas. We also have supporting locals, and really what that means is we are trying to promote better protection of saplings from both fires and hungry livestock in these small communities where deforestation has occurred. And we are also trying to educate indigenous people in these areas to do the same practices. And the last way we can do this is through natural regeneration, which is really just letting nature do its thing. This is actually the best of the three. When dormant seeds or seeds from nearby forests grow naturally without any human intervention, this allows for the greatest diversity of species, increasing a forest's resilience to outside forests such as pests and pathogens. So this is kind of what we really want to aim to do when it comes to reforestation. Getting into the drawbacks and oppositions, we can start with the fact that everyone really isn't on board with this idea, and there are implications with that. We also have the issue of money. With mass reforestation, there is going to be the need for money in order to actually achieve this goal. A big issue with reforestation as well is that the impacts aren't necessarily clear yet, and because of that, other companies aren't willing to jump onto the idea because they don't want to be left with a bad end result. Another issue with mass planting and talking about reforestation just a second ago is nature isn't always welcoming to large disturbances, meaning if we were to plant a bunch of trees in one area, nature wouldn't necessarily accept that, and there could be issues with that. Now, in order to achieve reforestation, I think the biggest goal is to kind of bring everything together, which is something we have talked about in class. And that is through conceptions, connections, and constatations. And kind of what I added to that is just commitment. We need everyone to really be on board, connected together, working for this one big goal. And really, in order to make this work, everyone needs to be giving it their all. If everyone's giving 50%, we're not going to be getting the best result out of all of this. Adding on to this too, kind of touching on whether this is really sustainable. It really all depends on if everyone, like I said, is giving their all. The only way this works is if everyone is really doing their job and their part in bringing back forest life. Getting into the finer detail of achieving reforestation means that committed companies really need to increase their efforts in implementing this. That can be increasing investment in traceability systems so that illegal logging really isn't as prevalent as it is now. Outside actors also need to become involved, particularly domestic companies in emerging consumer markets such as China and India. With places really big, we want to make sure we jump ahead of preventing issues like this from arising elsewhere. Lastly, we need to make sure committed companies are enhancing their monitoring capabilities, they're being accountable to what they're doing, and they're being transparent with everyone. What that does is shows that the impacts of reforestation are actually doing good, and in turn brings in outside companies to want to jump onto this idea. Kind of talking about earlier, everyone isn't really on board with the idea, but when people see that, hey, this is an issue and we can actually do something about that, everyone wants to come together in order to achieve reforestation.